Hello and welcome to another episode of National Divorce Talk Raw, where we will cover the important news regarding secession, national breakup, national divorce, whatever you would like to call it. The topic that states in America may choose to leave the United States, or the possibility that the United States may in the future appear disunited. And specifically focusing, when we can, on the case of why California itself would be fit to depart from the rest of the fellow 49 states. Well, let's get right into it. Today's episode, the news we're going to cover. Well, Donald Trump, Robert Reich, and Tim Pool have all been saying the same thing. It's time for a national divorce. Recently, Donald Trump tweeted out about civil war coming. Robert Reich, a famous Democrat and liberal politician who's worked extensively for multiple Democratic presidencies and famously for the Clinton campaign, has also talked about a national divorce. And Tim Pool, claimed liberal, but actually more of a conservative, is also talking about a national divorce and talking about how Robert Reich and Donald Trump are also talking about national divorce. So you got the top conservative, a top liberal, and another top conservative talking about each other, talking about national divorce. That's never happened before. People at that level talking about other specific personalities, talking about the idea of national divorce. We're also going to talk about how more people are predicting secession and national divorce over Roe v. Wade, the leaked controversial decision by the United Federal Supreme Court to overturn the Roe v. Wade decision. Additionally, we'll be talking about how even more legal experts are coming to the conclusion that we made a while back, that the Constitution is broken and gives too much power to a minority of the population represented by a majority of states. And finally, as always, we'll keep you up to date on everything that the federal government is doing, even under a Democrat, to ruin our life. Okay, well, let's get right to it. So the first piece of evidence we're going to get into is we're going to go by the news step by step. Let me just show you what's going on. Okay. Here we go.
I want to pull up this story from the Hartford Courant. Robert Reich op-ed, The Truth About America's Second Civil War. And the truth is, as he puts it, is that it's not going to be a civil war. It's going to be a slow, peaceful breaking apart of, people slowly deciding not to work with each other, but maintaining some things like the common defense or whatever. So just a moment ago, you mentioned, the potential for civil war, whatever. I read this article. It's from May 10th. And the fascinating thing is that when you actually read the history of the American Civil War, Robert Reich clearly did not. This dude, because if he did, his op-ed would not say, we won't go to civil war. His op-ed would be like, yeah, it's going to happen. He's basically saying that there's a disagreement on laws. There's a disagreement on how to run things. So people are deciding to hyperpolarize. Republicans move to red states, Democrats to blue states. And then ultimately, we're just going to decide to, just do our thing. Yeah, read about the Civil War. That's what was happening. Southern states were saying that.
So that's Tim Pool. He's a famous conservative, although he calls himself a liberal. And he's talking about an article by Robert Reich. We've covered here too, Robert Reich, The Truth About America's Second Civil War, where Reich himself, who's worked for the Clinton presidency and is well respected by Democrats, is talking about how America isn't working anymore and it's going to start pulling itself apart. And then here's Tim Pool, one of the most famous newscasters for everybody under 35, also talking about how Robert Reich is talking about. So you have a young person who covers news for people who are typically under 35 years of age and typically on the internet and don't get their news from broadcast journalism. And he's talking about how a famous Democrat liberal is talking about national divorce. So we have somebody who covers conservative news and covers internet news and covers people under 35, 45. And he's talking about how this establishment Democrat is talking about national divorce. We've never had that coalescing of the conversation amongst different points of people in the political sphere of America conversing before. And let's up the ante. So Donald Trump recently just shares a post suggesting civil war. Former President Donald Trump shared a post on a social media platform that appeared to propose or predict a civil war in the U.S. There it is, Donald Trump. And this man, we predict, could be president in 2024 again. The Republican Party is still under his control. So you can definitely bet that all the Republicans saw this. And we'll cover this a little bit more, but here you go. The most powerful country in the world is falling so fast that it makes you rethink what are the real reasons. Something so big and powerful can't be destroyed so quickly unless the enemy comes from within. President of El Salvador tweeted that, to which Donald Trump retweeted civil war. So Donald Trump, for the first time, has talked about how maybe there will be a civil war, or Donald Trump retweeted. I'm sorry, they call it retweet. It's retweeted. So MAGA King Thalos said civil war to this post here, and then Trump retweeted that, which appears as though Trump, the former president of America, is endorsing civil war. Now, to my knowledge, Trump hasn't said that there's definitely going to be a civil war or suggested that there should be a civil war before now. Additionally, this is the first time a American president or former American president has talked about civil war since 1861. And just to make sure that this is going in very clearly for you. So here's an article, Dana Milbank. Dana Milbank is a well-known columnist. Trump might be more dangerous without kingmaker status on May 26, 2022 for the West Virginia Gazette or Charleston Gazette Mail. And let's see if we can get this page to scroll down. There's the article. And here's the interesting thing. On Sunday, amid a growing number of signs that he has lost his hot hand in Republican primaries, Trump elevated the idea of civil war against an enemy coming from within the United States. Republican leaders, as usual, responded with silence. So let me just post that up, just to be clear. So Robert Reich is a well-respected Democrat who is saying, why did that not? Give me 1 second. That didn't copy for some reason. Copy. Paste. It's just not going to work. Okay, so the computer's not working. Donald Trump, to my knowledge, has never talked about civil war before. He's the first president of America since 1861 to talk about that. Robert Reich is a high-ranking Democratic representative who's also talking about national divorce. He's the highest-ranking party member in the Democratic Party to ever talk about that. So we have a very high-ranking Democrat talking about national divorce, and we have a former president talking about national divorce roughly about the same time. Never had a president talking about national divorce before. Never had somebody this high-ranking with this many connections into the Democratic Party of America over multiple administrations and with such respect across the board with liberals also talking seriously about the idea. And we never had a conversation where Tim Pool and them are starting to recognize each other in the conversation. Additionally, Trump did say it's time for a civil war, and no one in the Republican Party contradicted him or criticized him for saying that. That should also tell you something. Show you that again. There it is. As usual, Republican leaders responded as usual with silence when Trump elevated the idea of the Civil War. Okay. Now, Roe v. Wade is very controversial. The Supreme Court decision that they're going to overturn Roe v. Wade has gotten many people to talk about how a civil war or national divorce may happen. We've covered that repeatedly here at National Divorce Talk Raw. And here's another article by the Milwaukee Independent, Two Versions of America, Efforts to Reverse Roe v. Wade Proves a Second Civil War is Already Underway. This is the article by Robert Reich that we were talking about. This article by Robert Reich has been reprinted in multiple newspapers. It's also made the English news. And let's scroll down. And here you go. Where will all this end? Not with two separate nations. What America's going through is analogous to Brexit, a lumbering mutual decision to go separate ways on most things, but remain connected on a few things, such as national defense, monetary policy, and civil and political rights. That's literally what I suggested in my book, California's Next Century 2.0, was that we have what Robert Reich is suggesting. Let me see if I can copy this. The computer is not participating with me. I think it belongs to the deep state, and that's why it's not working with me. Or it's just I'm bad at technology. One of the two. We'll see. So this idea by Robert Reich, hey, let's not have a national divorce. Well, we need to go through something like Brexit, where it's a lumbering mutual decision to go separate ways on most things, but remain connected on a few things like national defense and money. That's called subnational sovereignty. It's what Scotland had with England before the vote in 2014 for full independence. Scotland was basically an independent country from England since around 2010. And except for national defense, monetary policy, and a few other things. But they had their own Olympic team, their own immigration policy, education policy, etc. And I had argued in my book, which started the entire Cal-Exit movement, that California could pursue subnational sovereignty just like Scotland did to England. And now I'm suggesting, well, I said this in 2012, California could pursue subnational sovereignty like Robert Reich is suggesting, a high-ranking Democratic politician, that maybe California could go its separate way from America and only have a few things linking it to the national core, perhaps a dollar and a commitment to national defense, much like NATO. But other than that, it would be independent. Robert Reich is now suggesting the very idea that I suggested in 2012. Top Democrat suggesting the very idea I suggested in 2012, 10 years ago, that started the path to Cal-Exit. Interesting that high-ranking Democratic politicians and officials who have advised presidents are now coming to suggestions that we made over 10 years ago. Okay, let's take another look real quick. 1 second. All right. Share screen, window, share screen. Here we go. Okay. Legal experts, and this is kind of similar. So you're going to see a lot of talk about how Roe v. Wade is going to bring on a civil war. Here's one by Robert Reich. We've been talking about that. That's the article that Tim Pool, this article by Robert Reich is this one here by Tim Pool that he's covering. So Tim Pool's talking about this article here, which we just covered. Additionally, legal experts fear overturning Roe v. Wade puts other liberties at risk too. So Roe v. Wade isn't going to just stop because Roe v. Wade was a dramatic reversal of what was called established precedent, meaning that America had allowed access to abortions for decades. This was considered precedent, which means basically established law. For the Supreme Court to go in and then say, I know that's been law for decades, but we're just going to overturn it because we feel like it, is very scary to many people. And so many people are looking at that and going, well, if you can just arbitrarily overturn landmark legal decisions that Americans view as core to what they know the law is, then what other landmark legal decisions can you just overturn, even though they've been precedent, because you just feel like it? And also because Samuel Alito argued that the right to abortion should be revoked since the right was not explicitly given in the Constitution, an argument that worries many legal experts. So if they overturn Roe, what other things can they do? They can strike down a right to contraception. They can strike down a right to same-sex and interracial marriage. They can strike down to control medical treatment, etc. So it doesn't just end. This is the big one that a lot of people are scared about, is that America, since it can remove a woman's right to get guaranteed access to an abortion, could also remove the right to same-sex marriage. And so what we would do is we would return to a country around the year 2000 where some places had same-sex marriages recognized and interracial marriages recognized, and some places didn't. Actually, 1950s. You go back to the 1950s, and some places recognized interracial marriages. 25 states made it illegal. Some places recognized same-sex marriages. I think only Hawaii and 49 states made it illegal. And some states recognized abortion and some didn't, about half and half. And what they're saying is, if the Supreme Court can just overturn precedent like this, they can overturn the precedent on same-sex marriage. So being in America is going to get a lot worse. You're going to start to lose all your rights, which is what we had talked about a while back. Here you go. By 2040, democracy in America will be dead and you will lose all of your rights. That's because conservatives will control the House, the Senate, and the Supreme Court, and they will strike down everything that you care about. Well, that's already happening now. Conservatives are due to own the House and the Senate with midterms, and they already own the Supreme Court. Even though Trump is gone, they are already creating a Republican future, and they are already doing Trump's bidding, even while he's out of office, by overturning Roe v. Wade. They're likely to go and overturn the right for gay marriage. The very next thing that they can move on to is, after they take the House and Senate in midterms and they control the Supreme Court, they could do anything that they wanted. There'd literally be no branch of government to stop them. So if you're a little bit scared about Republicans having a little bit of power by controlling the court, imagine what happens when they run the House and the Senate and the Supreme Court. Well, it's going to be this. By 2040, American democracy will be dead, because a small minority of the population, but a majority of the states, will be able to choose all the laws that we have. About 35 states will house a section of the population, but they will therefore dominate the House and the Senate, and therefore also the Electoral College, and therefore the presidency. And with the Senate and the presidency, will dominate the Supreme Court. And this is what we talked about. I want to repeat a statistic I use in every talk. By 2040 or so, 70% of Americans will live in 15 states, meaning 30% will choose 70 senators, and the 30% will be older, whiter, more rural, more male than the 70%. So 70% of the population will live in 15 states, and 30% of the population will live in about 35 states. So 30% of the population in about 35 states, and they will control everything. So I just want you to think about that. We're going to the future. %35 of population control 35 states, and therefore controls Senate, House, this is why we need to secede, California. In the future, 35% of the population of America will be in 35 states. That 35% of the population, or 1/3 of the American population, will control the 2/3 of the population. I want to repeat, 1/3 of the population will control 2/3 of the population. So if you have 1, 2, 3, 2/3 of the population is going to be out of power and will have to do whatever this minority group says, even though they're only 1/3 of the population. That's because they are 2/3 of the states. The Constitution is built to give rights to states and not people. We've talked about this a lot. 35 states is a majority of the country according to the Constitution. So 70% of the population, represented by 15 states, will have to do what 30% says, represented by 35 states. And you're already seeing that. Donald Trump was not popularly elected. The Senate was not popularly elected. So you had a minority of states in the Senate control the Senate, and you had a minority of the population through the Electoral College get Trump in. And that led to the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court making these decisions is making these decisions like Roe v. Wade for a minority of the population. The Supreme Court is making a decision like Roe v. Wade, which is demonstrably unpopular with the majority of Americans because they represent a minority of the population. A minority of the population got Trump into the presidency, and a minority of the population dominates the Senate. And when you have the president nominate a Supreme Court justice and the Senate confirm that Supreme Court justice, then you can have a minoritarian president and a minoritarian Senate create a minoritarian opinionated Supreme Court. And that's why we're in the situation we are now. What happens when the Republicans control the Senate and the House in midterms on top of the Supreme Court now? And then what happens in 2024 when they control the presidency? Well, the demographics are showing it's going to happen. It's only going to get worse. So we are moving to a future, and you are seeing signs now, where a minority of the population is very old, white, rural, and conservative, and only watches Newsmax and Fox News, is going to be running everything. And you're going to be having to face more and more decisions like Roe v. Wade being overturned, going, Why are we doing this when a majority of Americans don't even want this? It's because the Constitution doesn't give rights to people. It gives rights to states. What a majority of states want is what will happen. What a majority of people want is not necessarily what will happen. That's how the Constitution works. I really recommend that everybody read this article. This is the primary reason why we have been saying for years California has to get out now and Cal exit, because the demographics are only going one way. I mean, this is the people who voted for Trump. It's almost all of America. So the blue states make up half the population, and the gray makes up 30% of the population. So this orange boundary is all the states that voted for Trump. So as you can see, it's a majority of these light gray states. There's some blue states in there, but there's some blue states out. And even with the fraction of the blue states, a majority gray, they were able to take over. So that's why you have to be careful, because the demographics are only going to go one way. There's only going to be more Trumps, more conservative politics that match what a minority of states want, and less what you want. And here's where you can see people are starting to get that. So see this line, the 45 senators who defeated the bill represented just 38% of the American people. That's exactly what I'm talking about here. So here's someone, The Intercept, and they're talking about how when I think about, here's The Intercept, Birth of a Nation, the founders never envisioned a filibuster being used to block gun control after massacres, by Adam Gentleson, May 26, 2022. What they're talking about was they wanted to have a gun control measure passed in the Senate, and they got a majority of the votes, but it wasn't enough to make it happen. So over the years, innovative and obstructionists had repurposed the rule into a new kind of filibuster that was quieter and far more lethal than the old kind. Using this repurposed rule, the threshold for the background checks to pass a bill had been quietly raised from a simple majority to 60 votes without a single senator having to say a word. There was no great debate. There was no standing on the floor. The House just quiet failure in an empty chamber. 55 senators supported the bill, 45 opposed it, and the bill was defeated. The 45 senators who defeated the bill represent just 38% of the American people. So what they're talking about is, we just had a gun massacre. I think about 20 children were killed. A lot of people wanted some gun control legislation passed. The Senate, represented by a minority of the population, but a majority of states, was able to shut down meaningful gun control legislation after this massacre because of the filibuster. So even though they had 55 votes in the Senate, which is a majority, they didn't have 60, which means they didn't have enough to have a dominant majority or overreact on the filibuster, which means no bill passed. So you can have 55 senators, a majority. But if 45 senators, a minority, is against it, it doesn't pass. So 55 to 45, the 45 people win. Think about that. You have 55 votes for and 45 against. The 45 win, even though they're a minority, even though they're lacking 10 votes, because that's the way the Senate rules work. Why? Because the majority of the Senate is owned by a majority of the states, not a majority of the population. And here they go, wow, this is horrible that the American people want gun control regulation. They're willing to do it right after this massacre. And 45 senators who represent only 38% of the American people, or 40% of the American people, can get their will imposed on over 60%. 40% of the American people can get their will imposed on 60% of the people and shut down meaningful gun control legislation. They are finally talking about this in the year 2022. We talked about this in the year 2018. 4 years ago, we brought up that a minoritarian state can control people, that a minority of the population, who's a majority of the states, who are not diverse, not LGBTQ friendly, not full of immigrants, not liberal leaning, and who are strictly white, older, rural, more conservative, and more male, will be running everything. That's why a case that doesn't seem to make sense to you, like overturning Roe v. Wade, is passed, because it makes sense to this 38% that now control the country and will only be coming into more power, and there's nothing you can do about it all the way up to the year 2040 or 20 years from now. So we said, California, you have to secede because you're going to be dealing with these things like the Roe v. Wade being overturned, like not being able to get gun control legislation that you want. So Roe v. Wade is overturned. Gun control legislation that you want can't happen. Why? Because a majority of the states who represent a minority of the population want this. So even though a majority of Americans want gun control legislation, even though a majority of Americans want Roe v. Wade to stay here, you won't get it because the minority of the population will control what you can have, because that's the way the Constitution works, and you're screwed unless you blow up the Constitution. Your only way out is to secede. There it is. Stark contrast. Hey, we're upset about Roe v. Wade being overturned. Hey, we can't have meaningful gun legislation. Hey, you're never going to until the year 2040 or 20 years from now, because a minority of the population controls you, California, and there's nothing you can do about it. That's why they control the Supreme Court. That's why they control the Senate. That's why they control the presidency, even though they were a minority, because the Senate gives outside representation to small states. The Electoral College is not fair and gives outsized representation to states. And so you don't have population controlling the democracy here. Okay, and here's how it's going to get even worse. So we're talking about how these 30 states that are super rural and conservative are controlling America because they're very conservative and they're not liberal. Let's listen to the Democrats' plan on how to change that. So there's about 35 states that are rural and conservative and not liberal, and they're pushing these laws through using the system that the majority of the population doesn't want. What is the Democratic Party thinking on how to get more Democrats into those rural states so that we don't have a situation where we're held hostage by a minority of states? What are the Democrats going to do in order to change those 35 states to be more Democrat so that we don't have the horrible situation that we have now? Let's take a listen.
Yeah. Brian, go. I know.
I have
go
to say
for it,
something.
Claire. I think Brian's going to say the same thing.
And first of all, we are losing ground in suburban right now. And secondly, that is a great, we had a record turnout in 2018 in blue areas of our state. We killed it in St. Louis, in Kansas City, killed it. Our numbers were way over what we ever projected would be. Our voters turned out, progressive voters turned out, but there were more of them. And the problem is we have too many states where if our strategy is only motivating our multiracial base, we will not control the United States Senate because we have way too many Democratic senators from states that are Trump states.
Yeah, and I appreciate what you're saying. And I'll say for 22, the states are...
They just want reinforcements. They want people to show up. They want the Democrats to show up in these places.
Well, part of it is taking a step back. I mean, this whole discussion's around how Democrats have lost rural America, but it could easily be named how Democrats have won multiracial America. You know, you look at places like Albany, Georgia, that's rural, places where Democrats have made gains over the last couple of years. And also the reality that white voters, both men and women, are not drivers, increasingly, every election cycle of Democratic Party wins. And that's at every level. So the question for us to ask is, when we look at the Democrats losing steam in places that are largely white areas, pockets of America, look alternatively to the places where Democrats are being very successful. It isn't just exclusively urban areas. It's also suburban areas where the population is changing. And it's also slices of rural America in places like Albany, as I mentioned. My feeling is this. If you are looking to white voters for victory in 2022, the Democrats investing money, trying to satisfy voters who voted for Trump or are voting for Republicans more and more, it's going to be a tough road for Democrats. If instead they shift their focus to voters, not only voters of color, particularly women of color voters, Black, Asian American, and Latinos, who Asian American and Latino women have increased their voter turnout some 25 to 27%. That's the powerhouse for the Democrats, and my argument is to shift focus there.
Brian, go. I know.
I have
go
to say
for it,
something.
Claire. I think Brian's going to say the same thing.
And first of all, we are losing ground in suburban right now. And secondly, that is a great, we had a record turnout in 2018 in blue areas of our state. We killed it in St. Louis, in Kansas City, killed it. Our numbers were way over what we ever projected would be. Our voters turned out, progressive voters turned out, but there were more of them. And the problem is we have too many states where if our strategy is only motivating our multiracial base, we will not control the United States Senate.
Right there. So I hope you heard that. What you saw, we just got done talking about how in the future, 35% of the population in 35 states is going to control everything. And that we're already moving into that future. That's why you can't have gun control legislation like you want, because the filibuster in the Senate. That's why you have Roe v. Wade being overturned, because there's this control of states in the rural areas. And so Claire McCaskill is saying we have to have Democrats go into those rural states and get control of those rural states so that we have control of the Senate, because Claire McCaskill gets it. There are too many small states and they have control of the Senate and they can control the laws. So Democrats have to get in there and get control of those rural states. And what this advisor for the Democratic Party said was, no, we don't really need to do that. We're doing great with minorities. Let's just focus on minorities. Minorities aren't going to be in those 35 states. Like we just talked about, those states are going to be rural, white, old, non-immigrant, non-LGBTQ, old and white, and conservative. They're not going to have minorities there. They're not going to have LGBTQ people there, and they're not going to have liberal thinking progressives there. And so you're not going to control that state. And that's what the demographics show. And so you have a Democratic policy advisor suggesting that the Democrats basically just follow along with the demographic trend. Democrats, let's not worry about those conservative middle America states. Let's focus on minorities. Great. That gets you the same number of states you already have and leaves you in a position where a majority of states who represent a minority of the population will control you. I wanted you to see that clip because I wanted you to see that the Democratic Party doesn't understand the problem and isn't having any plans to fix the problem at all. It's not even on their radar. You heard Claire McCaskill begging for them to get out there and start getting into the rural areas. And then you heard a minority say, we're good just reaching out to minorities. Now, I'm a minority, and I think it's great you reach out to minorities. That is not how you're going to win elections. There ain't minorities out there. So reaching out to minorities isn't going to get you people in an area where there isn't minorities. So if you think the situation is going to get better, I wanted to show you that so that you knew the Democrats have absolutely no plan on how to fix this, and they're looking in the total wrong direction. So you can expect even more power going to the Republicans and conservatives in 2022 with midterms and 2024 with the presidency, just like we predicted in 2018. Okay, well, let's get to the final section of the show. We're going to talk about we've talked about Donald Trump, Robert Reich, and Tim Pool, our four national divorce. We've talked about how more experts predict civil war over Roe v. Wade. We've also talked about how even more legal experts realize the Constitution is broken, focusing on the states. And now we're going to get to the final section on federal mismanagement of guns and coal and why California should secede, looking at those issues. Let's take a look right now. Here we go. So we covered this before, but basically we wanted to show you that the Senate of America blocked a $48 billion package to help small businesses who are suffering from the COVID shutdown. Remember that never before in human history have businesses had to be shut down for a year and still stayed operational. You might have had wars where businesses were shut down, but you've never had a non-war situation where the government just said, you don't get to run your business and you can't have any customers for a year or two and deal with it. So there's tons of small businesses, especially here in California. Small businesses were crushed by COVID. Are they going to get any help from the federal government? No. Is California a donor state and pays more into the federal system than we get out? Yes. Do we have the highest number of small businesses destroyed by COVID? Yes. Is California the most deserving state and the state that needs the most help for small business aid? Yes. Did the federal government give us what we need? No. Did they instead pass a bill for more war in a foreign country of basically the same dollar amount instead of doing something that would help people here in America and especially in California? Yes. So Californians are against America's war. We were against the Vietnam War. We were against the Iraq War. We were saying, get out of Afghanistan. We were the only state to say you can't recruit in our high schools. So we were against Vietnam. We were against Iraq. We were against the bombing in Afghanistan. We tried to remove military from recruiting in our schools. We're the most anti-war state in America. And yet America passes a bill to fund war, and it can't pass a bill to help small businesses here in California. And it's always been that way. We're a donor state. Do we get our percentage back? No. We pay into the system as an insurance policy so that when we get hurt, we can get services. Well, now's the time for that insurance policy to pay back and help us out. Are they going to? No. Will they instead spill the money on war? Yes. That's America. Part 2. So until last week, California had laws on its books that prohibited teenagers from buying semi-automatic rifles, the go-to weapon for mass shooters, including the Buffalo suspect. Yet just days before the Buffalo terrorist attack, conservative judges sitting on the federal appeals court that covers California struck down those laws. So California had laws that prevented teenagers and youth from owning these semi-automatic rifles, just like what the Buffalo shooter had. And then the federal government again said, oh, California, did you have gun laws to keep your people safe? Well, you can't have that anymore. We routinely cover that here at National Divorce Talk Raw, how California passes gun control laws and they're shut down by federal judges. Well, we just had a massacre. And how did the federal government decide to respond to a shooting massacre? By removing California laws that keep us safe from shooting massacres. I want to be clear on this. We just had a national shooting massacre. And what did the federal government do? It removed a law in California to keep us safe from shooting massacres. So now we can't prohibit our teenagers from buying guns, which means we'll have more mass shootings. And it also means that California police now know that teenagers can own guns. So you're going to see a lot more accidental shootings of teenagers by police here in California because that toy rifle, they're just going to assume is automatically a real rifle because the law to ban kids from owning these guns has been struck down. So now California cops will say every kid in California could have a rifle. That toy gun, because I should assume is the real thing. Expect more California youth to be gunned down by the cops because of the federal government, and expect more mass shootings of Californians because of the federal government. So they won't take care of us and build our businesses back, even though we pay more into the system. You can't have the gun laws that you want to keep you and your children safe. But that's not all. The federal government is now looking, this is from Congressman Jared Huffman, the federal government is secretly trying to place a toxic coal train that would allow the transport of coal shipped through Utah, Nevada, west through Sacramento and Vallejo, and through the North Bay along the SMART train track. So there's a lot of coal that comes from the Midwest. They want to ship that coal from the American Midwest through Sacramento, our capital, to the coast, just above San Francisco, and then along the entire North Coast. The train tracks are literally just feet away from the drinking water source for nearly 1 million Californians, the Russian and Eel River. So not only would run tens of millions of tons of coal alongside unstable ground past critical waterways, but it would also extend reliance on coal as a global energy source and contribute to greenhouse gas production at a time when fossil fuels should be abandoned. So California is a climate change leader. And the federal government secretly said, oh, are you for climate change? Well, we want to burn more coal and we want to burn the dirty coal, moving it through you, California. And yeah, the coal train tracks might crash. And yeah, that might dump dirty coal in your air and pollute in the ground and also pollute the air if there's a dust plume of a coal train turning over. And yeah, maybe the coal trains will turn over and poison your water, but it's cool. So, federal government, no help for California businesses, but you can get war. You can't protect your children, and you can't have the gun laws you want, but you can have guns that kill everybody, and you can have more mass shootings. And did you say that you wanted to do climate change? Well, we thought you meant more coal and running coal along your water lines and population so that 1 million Californians could have dirty drinking water. That's what the federal government said. So you've seen it all. We have conservatives, a president, and a top Democrat both talking about national divorce. That's never happened before. We've had even more experts talking about how civil war is coming because of Roe v. Wade. You saw some of the reporting at the last National Divorce Talk Raw. We've had even more legal experts recognize that the Constitution is broken. You've seen us cover that for literally the last 2 years, or since the election of Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court, where people started to get that. And we just gave you another tasty update of how you cannot have the laws that Californians hold dear, that support California values, as long as you're part of the United States of America. But finally, one last message. This is from the CEO, Jason Reich.
To all of potential Pacifica. So, pardon my reading. As the democratically elected head of CalExit, it is my sincerest wish for our movements to work together for the betterment of all our people. From Hawaii to Alaska, Washington to Baja California, and everywhere in between, we are worth much more than we give or get credit for. The federal government in D.C. is supposed to govern over the federation, the conglomeration of state entities, not to mention non-state holdings such as Puerto Rico.
So, Cascadia. Jason is up there with you now, and he wants to talk to you. Jason is the top leader here at Yes California, and he is up there to make connections with the largest secession movement closest to California, which is the Cascadia movement. So some people have said, why is the CEO of California secession movement in Cascadia? Because when you're the head of a group, you go and reach out and make connections to other groups. The largest secession movement near California is Cascadia. So Jason, when he took over as CEO, said that we needed to make a strategic direction as Yes California and make strong connections with Cascadia. If you go to the Yes California Facebook and Twitter page, you'll see Jason interacting with Cascadia. Cascadia even recently made us a nice graphic. Let me see if I can show you that. I'm not sure if you can see that, but so we are making inroads with Cascadia. That was Jason Wright's direction. And here's a message from Jason to Cascadia. So anybody who's watching this in Cascadia, or anybody that you know who's part of the Cascadia movement, please let them know that we're trying to contact them and make inroads so that we have the two largest secession movements on the West Coast connected, at least networking with each other. Well, that does it for our show today. We'll have even more shows. There's still more news to come up. And we will get to that very soon. Thank you all for being here. Let's take a look at the comments. If the comments are relevant, we will cover them. If they're not, we will not. Okay. Progressive Will. IMO California should court Mexico, Central America, Panama, and Colombia into forming a new country. This would maybe open the door to infrastructure connecting North and South America. Interesting. Progressive Will, we had talked about... so the Baja independence movement, who Yes California specifically, and none of the other CalExit movements have made contact with, has talked about Baja Norte and Baja Sur, or the entire Baja Peninsula connecting to California. We have looked at that idea. So Jason Wright seems to think that's an decent idea. Progressive Will, I would suggest you contact Jason or contact us at Yes California. You can go to Yes California Twitter, Yes California Facebook, or you can email me and we'll put you in touch. But here you go, Progressive Will. It's an interesting comment. Jason seems to like it. Bob Tomlin says, divorce already. Bob's been with the CalExit movement for a long time. Thanks, Bob. Let's take a look. Oh, here's Jason. Progressive Will. I'm the elected head of CalExit. And what we would like to see is a free California. We'll work to form a Pacific Union, Pacifica, made of California, Oregon, Washington, Alaska, Hawaii, and Baja California. Through the reunification of California, once hashtag movement for Independencia de Baja California and CalExit. That's the Baja Independence Movement that, yes, California is already linked to. I just covered that. Have achieved our goals, and a possible union, which is even larger, could be a possibility, but would only be after some independence. Oh, in my opinion. Okay. In my opinion, Progressive Will. Well, Progressive Will, you can email me or Jason, and we would like to talk to you more. So Progressive Will, if you're watching this, or anybody, Marcus.Ruiz.Evans. We love your comments. We love you participating. And Progressive Will, that's an interesting idea. And, you know, we have our own opinions about the way that things are going, but the number one goal of Yes California is to keep the conversation going. So if you have ideas about how CalExit should go, if you think that we're getting it wrong, we don't want you to be quiet. We don't want you to not tell us. We want you to say something. I would rather be aware that I'm getting it wrong or have other ideas that I need to think of before I can move forward. And I would rather deal with the chaos and confusion of looking at multiple alternatives before deciding on one than to have a bunch of yes men who agree. I know Jason agrees with me on that. Thank you. We'll be coming up with more episodes of National Divorce Talk Raw coming very soon. Stay tuned. Thank you.